Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We have a nice big full room, so we're going to get started. I'm only slightly disappointed that we're not actually sitting up there at the judges, whatever you call that, the bench. Or when I walked into the room and saw this thing, I kind of thought that for sure I'd have a gavel and there would be some pounding. But anyway, we'll make do. Okay, so first of all, some kind of basic. If you've been coming to events here all day, you've probably heard this little spiel before. But this is my official opening statement. Good afternoon. My name is Nicholas Laughlin. I'm one of the team that runs the literary festival in Trinidad and Tobago, the Bocas Lit Fest. I'm very happy to be here at the Brooklyn Book Festival this year, celebrating its 10th anniversary. Why don't we give the Brooklyn Book Festival a round of applause for hitting 10 years? I actually do know how hard it is to keep a festival going for so long, and they're doing a brilliant job, as you all agree, because you're all here. Before we begin, I would like to let you know that books by all three authors at this table, which you already own and have read from cover to cover, but just in case you haven't, books by the authors can be purchased from the Greenlight bookstore outside of this room, or it might be downstairs, but somewhere in this building. And immediately following the program, authors will be signing their books at signing table A. Right, so let me tell you a bit about the three writers that I'm sitting here with, and then we're going to hear a little bit from each of their books before we start the discussion. So in alphabetical order, and starting at the far end of the table, Jami Attenberg is the author of 5 books of fiction, including The Middlesteins, which was published in 9 countries. Her latest book is St. Mazie. This is what it looks like. You can find it at the book table downstairs, which was released in June, and she is a Brooklyn native. She's one of you. In alphabetical order, next to me, Mr. Anonymous, because he lost his name tag, as you may have noticed.
No one knows my name.
His name, this is Marlon James, a Jamaican writer born in 1970. His most recent book is A Brief History of 7 Killings. Nice, bright yellow cover. You can't miss it. It's actually won quite a lot of prizes, and in fact, Marlon's whole biography is just a list of prizes. So I'm going to skip through them, but just tell you about the 2 most important ones. So my festival awards a prize every year for Caribbean fiction, and he's the 2015 winner of the OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Fiction. And as many of you probably know, he's also shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize, which is going to be announced quite soon, in a few weeks' time. This is his 3rd book. He previously published the novel The Book of Night Women, also won many prizes. And his first novel was called John Crow's Devil, also won a few prizes. He lives in Minneapolis. And sitting in the middle, Stewart is the author of 14 novels, including Snow Angels, A Prayer for the Dying, Last Night at the Lobster, and Emily Alone. His latest book, West of Sunset, follows F. Scott Fitzgerald's final years in Hollywood. He's one of Granta's original Best Young American Novelists. He's written a few nonfiction books. He's kind of co-written a book or 2 with Stephen King. Please give them a round of applause to welcome them, and we'll properly get started. So I think it's always useful to hear a bit of the book the books that we're going to be talking about before we get into the discussion. So probably in alphabetical order, they'll each read a short passage, and what I'll do is also I'll ask them to, because even though you've all bought and read the books cover to cover, some of us, we approach middle age, our memories start to fade. So I'll ask them just to kind of give you like the 3-sentence summary of what happens in the book before reading their excerpt. This is going to be a challenge for Marlon. I don't know how he's going to. His book in particular is probably impossible to summarize in 3 sentences, but we'll see how good he is when he gets to that task. So we'll start with Jami.
So this is I'm going to read from St. Mazie, and it's inspired by the real-life story of Mazie Phillips, who ran a movie theater on the Borough of 1920s to 1940s. She sat in the ticket booth. She was known as the Queen of the Bowery, and she was kind of a boozy broad. And she also dedicated her life to helping all the homeless. And she was originally written about in Joseph Mitchell's Up in the Old Hotel, which is how I found out about her, if you have read that book, a classic New York book. And I'm just going to read, this is early on, and the form of the book is, it's a mixture. The spine of the book is her found diary, and then an invented oral history around it of people who knew her or knew people who knew her. I'm going to read just from the diary. And she's in her 20s, and she's working on this ticket booth. It's Mazie's diary, March 1st, 1918. I met a nun today. Holy moly, my first nun. It's not like I've never seen a nun before. They're all over the place, those Catholics trying to save everyone's soul in the Bowery. All the people having too much fun for their own good. But they've always left me alone before. I don't know why. Maybe my dresses are too fine for them to bother with me. But I'm sitting in that booth all day, a working stiff, doing what I do. So now they're after me, I guess. All right, I was taking a nip from the flask, it's true. A nip and a cigarette, no one can blame me. I'd read all my true romances, and there wasn't another show for 20 minutes. Jeannie had already stopped by to drop off my lunch. She was onto the track. People were hustling by on the sidewalk, but no one stopped to say hello. Cars choking on the street, cursed train rumbling above, nothing left to do but drink. So I lift the flask to my mouth, and then out of nowhere, there she is, her face pressed up against the glass of my cage, her hands to the bars. I screamed. She said, "Before you drink, think." I caught my breath, but then I was seeing red. I said, "I'm thinking just fine." I tipped the end of the flask into my mouth. She shook her head, judging me on behalf of Jesus. She had honey blonde hair, a little wisp of it sneaking out from her habit. Her eyes were like blue glass. They had a shimmer to them. No makeup, just her face. She wasn't much older than me, and she was short like me, but I didn't know if she had the same curves under that habit. There we were, two girls on Park Row. Only one of us was showing a lot more skin. I said, "I ain't hurting anyone." She said, "Except yourself." I said, "Oh, brother." I started blowing smoke in her direction, and she took a step back. I said, "What's your name, sister?" She said, "Sister T." I said, "What's the T for?" She said, "It's T-E-E, not T. T's for Teresa, but there's 10 Teresas in the church, so we all have different nicknames. And I'm just T because I'm we." This made me like her. She's just a kid, I thought. I'm one too, I guess. She said, "We're not talking about me, though. We're talking about you and your soul." I said, "I'm Jewish, so you can stop worrying about my soul." She said, "Everyone can be saved." I said, "Sister T, you wouldn't even know where to begin with me." It made her laugh a little bit. She was sweet. I'd have liked to see her out of that habit, all dolled up in a club on 2nd Avenue, dancing up a storm with the sailors, slap some rouge on those baby cheeks of hers, and she'd grow up real fast. But it was not to be, me and Sister T. A line started to build for the next show. I said, "All right, go find another drunk to help. I got work to do." She said, "Remember to think about what I said." I said, "Scram." I waved her off with my hand. She swished off in her skirts, and I was missing her already. I said, "But come back sometime. Come back and say hi." She was bold, and I liked it. For a nun, she had flair, and I liked how she seemed both old and young. I thought maybe she would be my first friend on Park Row. Even if she thinks I'm no good, I bet she'd still be my friend.
Oh, alphabetic. I'm still trying to cut this down. The short description. Brief History of 7 Killings is about the men who tried to kill Bob Marley and the various men and women who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when it happened. And the consequences spread from December 1976 all the way to 1991. So I'm going to read a section from a character. Her name is Dorcas Palmer, and she's a caregiver. Her name is not really Dorcas Palmer. And she is in the middle of, she's not taking care of this guy, but at some point, it happens that the guy becomes this kind of raging madman locked away in her bathroom. So this is it. And this is 1985. I don't know, but I'm coming damn close to the conclusion that Heather Locklear's hair looks better in TJ Hooker than it does in Dynasty. Or maybe I just don't like that the one woman in Dynasty who has to struggle for everything is the bitch. And not even a real bitch like Alexis Carrington, so since she doesn't have any money, so she's just really a bitchlet. This is why her hair just don't blood clot work on that show, because she really makes me want to wear a uniform when she's on TJ Hooker. Maybe become a policewoman for real, because trying to wear an attractive clothes all day is just too damn expensive, especially when you're not trying to look good. Sometimes you just want a shirt that still makes men know that you have breasts. He's still in the bathroom. It's weird how I've been calling him he for the past, 55 minutes? I mean, I don't know who the hell is in my bathroom. The thing is, the more I try to think about it, the less sense it makes. So the best thing to do is to not think about it really. Like that man in Crime and Punishment where Dostoevsky says he was beyond thought or something like that. I swear to God, sometimes I wish I was still a book-reading woman, lost on a bus somewhere in the city. At some point, it just turned into effort like I was trying, which wasn't a problem really until I started to wonder what exactly I was trying to do. I guess everything needs a goal after all. I don't know what the rest I'm talking about. Anyway, this man is still in my bathroom like this is The Shining, and me about to get on like Jack Nicholson. All this time I'm trying to figure out what health problems such a strapping man could have, and it never occurred to me even once that clearly his problem was not physical. I mean, this don't make no sense. This will not lead to me thinking again. How about this? There's a man inside my bathroom that needs to come out. I can't get him to come out, so his family is coming to get him. Now I can get some peace from just concentrating on the facts of the situation. I like how that just reduces everything into something I don't care about. I like reduction, boiling down, editing out, leaving behind. Enough with metaphors, enough with just cutting unnecessary shit from my life. 2 sounds that I know. The window sliding up and back down, but there's a grill to keep people out, plus we're 5 floors up, which I guess he didn't remember. He's trying to escape. How long before he works up some courage to kick down the door and fight? Try to beat me up. I know about these ex-soldiers, you know. Everybody in the city looking like any minute they might fall apart. You know what? I'm just gonna stay sitting on this couch, straighten out the red velvet covering, and watch the end of TJ Hooker. Maybe I should ask if he needs anything. That's what people always do on these TV shows. I'm certainly not gonna ask him if he wants to talk about it. Maybe I should clean up my apartment since people are coming over. Sure, like they're coming over to check the place. They won't even notice the bathroom rug that their daddy is sitting on. Maybe he's sitting on the toilet, or maybe the edge of the tub, I don't know. What is he doing in there? Jesus Christ, he was so normal only a few hours ago. I'm wondering which one of us just woke up from a bad dream. I knock on the door. There's Ms. Calder's. She's wearing a scarf on her head that looks like she's hiding rollers, and a thick camel coat because that makes perfect sense on a summer night. She whispers, "For Christ's sakes," and walks right past me. Since I'm pretty sure I don't have a job anymore, and as such, don't have to be polite to pushy white people, I was just about to tell this made-over bitch to show some rascal manners in my house when the son makes it up the stairs and straight to my door. The son looks at me and mouths, "I'm so sorry for all this." Thank you.
My book is about F. Scott Fitzgerald, late in his life when he's broke and drunk, and he goes out to Hollywood and tries to earn enough money to pay for Zelda's hospitalization and his daughter's boarding school and to sort of find himself again as a man and as a writer. He goes out there, he falls in love, he works on a lot of different movies, doesn't do very well, but he works on Gone with the Wind at one point. So it's him out at the Garden of Allah hanging around with Hemingway, Dorothy Parker, Humphrey Bogarts, Robert Benchley, and some other people. And he is the broke, failure, drunk guy surrounded by people who are rich and famous and at the height of their careers there. So this is the very beginning of the book. That spring, he holed up in the Smokies in a tired resort hotel by the asylum so he could be closer to her. A bout of pneumonia over Christmas had provoked a flare-up of his TB, and he was still recovering. The mountain air was supposed to help. Days he wrote in his bathrobe, drinking Coca-Cola to keep himself going, holding off on the gin till nightfall, a small point of pride, sipping on the dark veranda as couples strolled among the fireflies rising from the golf course. Outside of town, Highland Hospital crowned the ridgeline, a spired Gothic palace in the clouds worthy of a bewitched princess. He couldn't afford it, as he couldn't afford the other private clinics they'd tried, but he pleaded poverty and hashed out a discount with the trustees, begging the money from his agent, an onerous form of credit, borrowing against stories he'd yet to imagine. He had no choice. At Pratt, they left her too much alone. She'd strangled herself with a ripped pillowcase, nearly succeeding, the livid band across her windpipe a reminder. One night, while she was strapped to her bed, the Archangel Michael appeared, glowing, and told her the world would end unless she could move the 7 nations to repent. She took to wearing white and memorizing the Bible. In her paintings, the faceless damned writhed in fire.
Okay, so we've got three novels here. One is set in the Lower East Side during the Depression, one in Hollywood in the 1930s, one ranges from Jamaica to various parts of the US between the 1970s and early 90s. So they're pretty different books. What they all have in common is, as the title of the event suggests, is that they're all looking back at the past, and they're all taking their starting points from, real people, real events, facts of history. Whoever came up with the idea for this panel very helpfully gave us our very first question, the very first thing I'd like the writers to talk about, because we've apparently promised that they're going to discuss what riveted them to the time and location of their most recent novels. I mean, that's an obvious place to start. Why these particular stories? Why these particular people? Maybe, Jami, you could go first. I mean, you told us that you came across the character of Mazie
I
in
did, yeah.
that
I read,
Mitchell essay.
Right, I read about him read about her in the old hotel. I was really drawn to her because she was like a really good person but a deeply flawed person. And I say this as someone who has a hangover right now, so I think maybe I identify with the flaws more than the charitable nature of her work. But I really wanted to know. I think I wanted to learn how to become a better person, and she seemed to be a really great person. I wasn't necessarily interested in the historical time frame, but I couldn't shake her. And when you can't shake a character, then you have to stay with them. And I just was fascinated by her, and I wanted to know more. And so I sort of grudgingly did the research, and I was quite surprised that I was writing a New York novel. I had no intention of writing a New York novel, but it sort of was part of the package, part of the deal. But then it became really fulfilling, and it ended up being a little bit of a love letter to New York to write it. So I just loved her, though, most of all.
And did you discover how to be a better person?
Every day I work on it.
It's a process. Okay.
Yeah, but I had to make it up because she's quite a mysterious character in the essay. I mean, Mitchell does a great job of giving you just enough information and leading you on in all of his pieces. He's great at leaving things out as much as he is at putting things in. And so I invented, the reasons why, who she was. But at her core, she was a great person. And I'll add that since I'd never met anyone who knew her, and then since the book has come out, people have kind of crawled out of the woodwork and said, yeah, I knew her when I was a kid, and she was really great. And they remember her 50 years, 60 years later. They really... She died 50 years ago last year, and I still get emails from people who knew her when they were a child, and she used to come to schools and hand out candy which you could never do now. I mean, no woman is allowed to stand in a corner handing out candy to kids. That doesn't happen. But and actually a woman contacted me very recently, and she works at the school that. Mazie used to hand candy out, and I'm going to go and speak at the school.
Nice.
Yeah, so it sort of affirmed everything I kind of believed about her.
Yeah. Do you think they'll let you hand candy out? I mean, you've been invited, you've been vouched for.
What, I should hand out candy to the kids?
Yeah, I think you should hand out some candy to the kids, don't
Not
you
if I want to get invited back.
No, okay. It could be really organic, healthy candy.
Or maybe some hard candy, maybe.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Stuart, you just confessed to me a few minutes ago that, we were chatting before the event started, and I sort of said something like, so Fitzgerald must be one of your favorite writers that make you want to write about him. And he actually said, not really.
Yeah. No, his story fascinates me. I mean, as much as the writing is wonderful and deep and poetic and lovely and insightful about the American condition. Just his time there in Hollywood. The worst has already happened. Zelda's been institutionalized for years now. He's separated from his daughter. He doesn't really have a home. He's dead broke. He's fighting sort of the demons of his alcoholism. And his friends have kind of turned on him. Hemingway has turned on him. And he's got to dig himself out from this hole, and there's nothing he can do except work as a writer and work on things that he feels are not quite worthy of his talents. Someone who has nothing, who has to fight to sort of regain a sense of self, a person who's an outsider. He was always the poor kid from the rich neighborhood. He was the subscription boy at boarding school. He was the Easterner out west. He's the New Yorker in Hollywood. He's the novelist trying to be a screenwriter. He's always on the outside looking in. And I think that informs his sensibility, and I try to use that sensibility in the book then. And he's a great character because he always undermines himself. When he's about to have some kind of success, he manages to screw it up in the most spectacular possible way. But he also falls in love. And he's got this romantic sensibility which he regains there, falling in love with this woman named Sheila Graham, who he discovers that's not her real name. She's not who she says she is. She's made herself up the way that he's made himself up, the way that Gatsby makes himself up. So it's that idea of he's a fake, he's an actor in a place where everyone is a fake and an actor. Plus Hollywood in the 1930s, it's the height of the studio system. And there's all this glamour around, surrounded by absolute poverty. So that juxtaposition was a lot of fun. Who's in and who's out? Who's allowed to be part of this idea of the American dream? And what promises does America make to us? What promises does Hollywood make to us? What promises does romance make to us? And are they true? Are they false? Can they be fulfilled?
So Marlon, your book hinges on this moment, which is an absolutely pivotal, crucial, enormous moment, not just in the sort of history of post-independence Jamaica, but really of the whole Caribbean, the attempted assassination of Bob Marley. And it becomes this sort of, it represents almost the distress and, the death of the optimism after, the independence movement in the 50s and 60s. And so what other than that drew you to this?
That wasn't enough.
Oh, no.
I'll say what other than that, because I was 6 years old in 1976. In fact, when Marley was tried, it was just days after my 6th birthday, and I think certainly that year, that was I don't know if the independence dream ever died, but that's when it crashed, and I think. There were a lot of terrible things that happened that year. The year started out with contaminated flour being distributed in Jamaica, and at one point almost an entire family was wiped out. And things just continued to get worse that whole year. So the assassination attempt just seemed like it was the dot in the exclamation point. But I also think, I was 6, 1976 was a world of wonder for me. It would be for any 6-year-old. But I know I certainly as a kid could sense fear. And my parents are pretty flippin' brave and badass. But I could tell that when Marley got shot, that's what changed everything. Because Marley is untouchable, was supposed to be untouchable. The rule in Jamaica is nobody touches the tough gang. And his house also would be the kind of place where people who are trying to kill each other only a day before would be playing dominoes there. So it's this kind of sanctuary, sanctified space, and that people would not just try to kill him, but violate the space. It really was, that was it. It's all gone to hell. It's all gone to hell now. What drew me to it is because that never left. And I think that event and that year still hovers. And it's not all bad. It was also the explosion of creativity. That's when reggae hit the top 10. So it was, there was scandal. Somebody win Miss World and immediately says, my boyfriend is Bob Marley, who was married at the time. So it was, and a lot of it is because it always hovered, and even when I started writing this 4 years ago, 1976, and what it caused still hovered. So it just kind of, took residence in my head and wouldn't leave until I wrote about it.
In the acknowledgements at the back of the book, you mention, it has to be at least 5 or 6 different people who helped you do the research for the book, actually pull the facts together, which is, leads us to kind of another obvious question. These books are obviously, they're based, to some degree on, going through archives, going through personal records, going through historical records. How did you assemble facts, produced by 6 or 7 different researchers, plus the ones that, how do you, what's the alchemy that turns it into convincing fiction?
I don't know, because for me, I research pretty much everything. I'll spend even 2 years doing it, or rather getting my assistants to do it and taking the credit. It's because it's usually for me it's simpler things I need. The big historical details I know.
You already know.
I already know. Sometimes I want to know just how much did something cost. What type of food shortage was around that time, if it was my previous novel, is how do people keep their teeth clean? They don't. And I get to a point where I'll do enough research to start the book, and then I'll just write. And maybe like 200, 300 pages in, then I'll go back and do some more, and some things I might need to fix, and some things I'll just fill in. But because I love to not write, and research is a great way to not write.
How do the other writers feel about it? Do you also love to not write?
No, I love to write.
Okay,
Yeah.
one in
really-
favor of writing,
I
one in
don't-
favor of not. Stuart, what's your vote?
I don't like researching that much.
Oh, okay.
I actually really love to write. I like to make it up. I don't want to have to like get the facts right or get the facts wrong, as it were. But there wasn't very much information about Mazie at all. There was the original essay, and there was her obituary, and there was an article about her funeral, and then an article when she retired from the movie theater, and there was nothing else. We didn't find a photograph until after I'd finished the book, so I didn't even know what she looked like.
You're so lucky.
Yeah, well, it was really frustrating, and then it became really freeing because I was like, I can invent anything, and that was how the oral history component came into play, because I wish that there was somebody I could ask about her, and then I was like, I'll just invent a character who will tell me everything that I need to know. So the research that I did was really, what did the Lower East Side look like in the 1920s? What were some interesting historical events that happened that weren't, we know about, the Wall Street crash, things like that, but what were some other things that were going on that were kind of interesting, that were more on the ground level and not in the bigger picture? That kind of stuff was the best the best book that I read was actually a book written in the 1930s about the 1920s. So what they thought was important in the 1930s is not what we think is important now. So I learned about things in that I had never learned about before. One of the most interesting things was that there was actually a Wall Street bombing 95 years ago this past week that I had never heard of before, and it was devastating. And it was apparently Italian anarchists that did it, and you don't know about it anymore. And it was actually a great device for me to put in the book that sort of allowed me to write about feelings that I had about September 11th, that I would never actually have fictionalized September 11th. It's just not something I would do, but I was able to use this little, and that came out of the research. And it never would have occurred to me to write. So research, I think, can be like an incredible gift, but I agree with you that you have to stop at some point and just write.
So, Stuart, how many biographies of Fitzgerald did you or did you not read before you got to work on your book?
Far too many. And for me, it was trying to find opportunities to do scenes, dramatic scenes that hadn't really been done before. When we know that Dorothy Parker and Scott Fitzgerald had an affair in the 20s, and that they were then neighbors in the late 30s at the Garden of Allah, and that there were parties there, but there are no scenes, there's no dialogue between the two of them. So I take that as an opportunity to put them together during some of the parties poolside there. Or they're working on the same hallway at MGM with Aldous Huxley and James M. Cain. So put them together. Let's see them interact. Let's see how they talk to each other. Humphrey Bogart was living there with the woman that would become his second wife, who had a gun and often fired it at Humphrey Bogart. And they're wild alcoholics. So there's possibilities and probabilities there that I want to explore in terms of scene that haven't been done in the biographies. But I also have to sort of honor the biographies, and he's where he is during that time frame. He meets the people that he meets during that time frame. I can't do the Inglourious Bastards thing and have him kill Hitler. It's not going to work. He can't survive and go live with Salinger in the village and teach Salinger how to write.
But you should write that. You should write that book out.
I was about to say maybe that could be the sequel. Stuart, do you lie in bed at night staring at the ceiling wondering what Fitzgerald would think of your book? Or just to remain sane, you just kind of, I should never have mentioned that. Now I've opened a door that you don't want to go through.
Obviously when you're walking in the footsteps of someone who's a great writer, you have to be careful about how you're going to work with the material. I'm not going to try to ape his voice. I'm not going to do the book in a first person. That would be impossible. You can't out Fitzgerald. That's silly. It still has to be my voice and my sensibility. I can work through point of view to work with his sensibility and maybe with a little bit of his language, but not too much there.
I think for me, even more terrifying would be writing lines to Dorothy Parker.
Oh, no, she was fun to work with. And her husband, Alan Campbell, they were a writing team, and supposedly he was the funnier of the two. And they were that classic couple where he was openly bisexual in Hollywood. She didn't really care for him very much and would sort of run him down. They got divorced. 10 years later, they got married again. He was the love of her life, and she was the love of his, even though they didn't quite get along. Yeah, so it was great to work with them, and with Bogart, of course.
Can you say something?
No. I was just laughing at the
actually,
Bogart thing.
Oh, okay. I want to ask you a question, Marlon. For a Jamaican audience, there's a lot in this book that could be pretty controversial.
Yeah.
Because you're going into a period of Jamaican history which is very complicated, which people still have very unresolved feelings about, and where there's still a lot of mysteries. Is that something that intimidated you writing the book, or is it something, have you had any really interesting, surprising, just kind of pushback from readers in Jamaica specifically?
I'm sure there is pushback. I just ignore it. At some point I just had to sort of shut myself off to all the different voices and potential voices that would arise, because it's still fiction. It's still, a lot of it is me doing some sort of guesswork, some sort of detective work about stuff which there isn't necessarily written history about. Some of the characters, they may not have been there, but they could have been. And to an extent, I am kind of sort of pulling fiction privilege. So this is still a possible thing. But at the same time, there is a sense of, are people thinking I was trying to do this muckraking thing, and why am I bringing up on terrible things and so on, and why we can't leave those things down. What I find the difference is sometimes generational, that younger kids are like, I'm so glad we're talking about these things and getting that stuff out in the open, whereas older may not necessarily think that. But I had to get to the point where I got over my fears about how the book would be, how people would respond to it, because that was a very huge thing, because it's still pretty recent. A lot of the players are still alive, or at least they got kids, and so it was.
They got kids. They got political parties.
They got political parties. They got whatever.
I remember you saying before the book was published, and kind of half joking, that once the book was out, you couldn't go back to Jamaica, or at least you'd have to wait quite a long time.
I'm still wondering about that.
Oh, have you been back? You haven't been back?
I haven't been back. I'm probably going to go back for the Calabash Festival, but it'll be interesting.
Did you bought your bulletproof vest yet?
Probably, because it's I don't know. I was talking to some Jamaicans last night. They said there's no copy of the book anywhere. There are no copies of the book in Jamaica, that nobody was selling it. I'm like, so I don't know.
Wow.
I want to kind of the character of Mazie. After I read the book, I went back and I looked for the Joseph Mitchell profile.
Yep.
And I was really struck by the voice that he captured, like her voice that he's supposedly reporting. So you're assuming it's a fairly true representation of her voice. It's quite different to the voice, both the speaking and thinking and writing voice that you create in the book. And I wonder how much of that was just whether you were kind of that was deliberate. It's just the way you conceived the character and kind of went with the flow.
I stole some words here and there from her, and I there's a couple of lines that I really liked that I put into the book. But yeah, she just had to become her own broad. She had to take
What do you
off.
think she would think of the book?
I mean, I don't want to sound like a crazy person, but sometimes I talk to her a little bit about it.
What did she say?
Well, it's just really cool. I just, it is a case of maybe loving a character maybe too much, but I wanted people to know about her. And when the book came out and all of the reviews, the first paragraph of every review talked about who she really was. And I just thought she's got to be happy that people know what she did and that she's out there in the world. So. But I do a little guardian angel-ish action. I probably need to write another book and move on and let Mazie go a little bit because I think about her a lot. But I hope that she would like it. I hope she wasn't a judgmental person. So, and I hope that comes. I think her spirit is there. Her essence is there.
Did you said that, when you were writing the book, you hadn't even seen a photo of her as yet. What did she look like in your head? Or maybe another way to ask this question is when we see the movie of Saint Mazie, and you're casting the title role, who is it?
Who is it? It's Helena Bonham Carter.
Okay, that's interesting. That's maybe not an academic question for Marlon, because in fact, A Brief History of Seven Killings is being made into an HBO miniseries. I mean, when you think about it, do you imagine specific people portraying specific characters?
It's weird because when I'm writing, pretty much every time I'm writing something, yeah, of course I do. But this one, once it became something that might be real, I kind of went blank. It's like Idris Elba says yes, I wouldn't say no.
So who's going to play Bob Marley?
God, I don't know.
In your dream situation, anyone, you just call the name and he'll walk through the door.
The funny thing is, in the stuff I've written so far, he isn't even in it. Because ultimately, it's really not a book about him.
And you don't even really name him in the book.
I don't really name him in the book. He's a pivot that turns, that sets everything in motion. But the book goes on till 91, and he's out of the scene from 81. So it's, but yeah, I haven't thought about that. It's one of those things you think about even when you're writing stuff as a kid, but once it becomes sort of near real, like, you know what, I'm gonna leave that.
I remember. I think it was To the Lighthouse. Virginia Woolf got a letter after To the Lighthouse was published from some elderly gentleman who was an amateur naturalist. And he corrected all of the facts of natural history, like this particular bird is not found in this place. It could not possibly have been this shrub because it doesn't grow that far north, or all of that. This may be less of a problem for you, Jami, because nobody knew anything about Mazie, but have you got, some irate reader kind of writing you to say you got this thing absolutely wrong, it's a scandal, you've disgraced history, or this famous writer, or it hasn't happened yet? Maybe that person is in this room, actually, waiting to ambush you.
Well, I did have one film buff write me a letter that said, so-and-so could not be in a picture in a newspaper because at that time they were actually on Broadway. They weren't in Hollywood at that moment there. And I was like, so maybe they used an old photo. Maybe.
I've had one or two things, and I just say I don't give refunds.
But is there, so the books are all published, they're out in the world, people are reading them. Do you ever go back to them and kind of think, like, this is one little thing I got wrong, whether it's maybe not a historical fact, but perhaps like a little, a nuance of character that you now, kind of rethink?
Yeah. There's a, should I answer first?
All of you, yeah.
Okay.
Any of you.
There's a character who's barely mentioned in the book. And I only found out about her after I finished. And it's the person would have been the character Papalo's wife. And the character she's based on turns out to be really, really fascinating. She used to design an intern for Mary Quant. So she was a part of her own Austin Powers movie in swinging 60s London. And she left all of that from one of the worst slums in the world. And I'm like, you're a whole novel by yourself. And I'm actually kind of really sorry I missed her.
Well, that's your sequel. So Stewart has his sequel, which is a kind of alternate history where Fitzgerald survives and meets up with Salinger and, in New York. You've got your kind of sequel.
She's really fast. She's still alive. So.
It was a section we had written in and we took out. In the original Mitchell text, she's very violent. Really roughs these guys up.
But it's a kind of loving violence.
It's a loving violence, but she's the bouncer of her own movie theater, and these bums come and sleep in the theater, and if they start snoring too loudly, she kicks them out, beats them up with the rolled up magazines and throws them out on the street. I was really interested in having a female character who was violent, and I had a really violent scene with her in it, and it slowed it didn't work. It was slowing it down. It sort of felt like it came out of nowhere. But I wanted her to be, it's not that I want women to be violent, but I think that people don't talk about women being violent in fiction enough, and it's an instinct and it's an urge, and I wanted to explore that a little bit more. But maybe that'll be in the next book.
Mazie the Destroyer, the sequel.
Mazie. Right.
Yeah. Stuart, what about you? Anything that you kind of go back now and you think, oh, I wish I'd made him say this instead, or
Maybe little details about LA. I mean, I'm not an LA guy. I'm not from LA. Haven't visited there a whole lot, and I'm writing about an LA that's mostly gone at this point. So I was doing a lot of photo research, video research, and I might put in a little bit more of the natural world of LA. I maybe focus on that because in all the LA stuff, nobody looks at LA as a beautiful city, and I think LA is a beautiful city. In the mountains, it's a garden spot, the ocean is there, and it's partially desert. It's really kind of spectacular, and Fitzgerald, coming from the Midwest, sees this whole different world there, and with his sensibility, I think feels that it's a little bit like the Riviera. And so I think I'd oonch that up a little bit.
yeah. One of the other questions we're supposed to be addressing is this one of how the past speaks to the present, and we've kind of touched on that. So, Jami, for instance, you were talking about how writing about the Wall Street bombing gave you an opportunity to write something that almost paralleled the sense of what was happening in New York in 9/11. You also mentioned going back and reading an account of the times that was closer to the times and how it made you think differently about that era. What do you think? What did you learn from that that's changed the way you think about us now, about New York now?
I mean,
It's
it's just so cyclical. I mean, we just kind of keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And like New York has like there's a lot of discussion of class in the book, although not named as such. But we were really shitty to our poor people, and we have been for a really long time. And New York just keeps inventing ways to like move them somewhere else. And so that was something that was interesting to me, to see how they were, just thinking about tenements and thinking about these buildings that were, had mold, and there were those iron lung buildings that were really terrible. And what New York would do was just move everybody to, Brooklyn, like move everyone out of the building or kick them out, and then just like tear them down and build something new over it. They would never actually fix the problem. They throw money at it. I'm saying New York like it's a person, but it is kind of its own entity, right? So that was something that I just didn't. When you study the history, you see the cycles, and it's too big of a city to fix, I think.
Who is today's Saint Mazie of the Bowery, or could there be such a person? Has the city changed to the point where a single person could play the kind of role that Mazie did? Everybody, they're in our neighborhoods, right? Yeah.
There's people who are out there in their neighborhoods. Sometimes it's in the smallest ways. Just there's a guy I know who just cleans up the park near my house. I just see him in there all the time, and he's not employed by the city, but he's just like, I'm just trying to make my neighborhood a little bit better at this moment in time. There are St. Mazie's people who work specifically with the homeless, like all over the place. She was her own person, her own unique entity, and she did not abide by. She made her own rules, but I still think that there are people who are doing that here, and they're not really recognized enough.
Stuart, working on this book, did it sort of give you any insights into this specific question, how the past informs the present? What did you learn about the here and now from setting this book in Hollywood in the 1930s?
Well, in Fitzgerald at the time is writing The Last Tycoon, which is about basically power. And you tie that together with what he wrote about in Gatsby. It's class and power, and that question of who's allowed to hold it, who's allowed in, what do you do to get it, how do you try to belong? And if you don't belong in the beginning, no matter what you do, you might never be able to belong. And I think that's still true today in America. I still see that everywhere in America.
Yeah. Marlon, you were just more or less saying that the past in your book is still the present because it's so close, and the repercussions of the things you write about in the 1970s are still pretty much driving many forces in contemporary Jamaican society.
Yeah, it is, which is why to an extent I didn't learn squat from from trying to figure it out, and I didn't think I would. I was trying to make sense of it, but I ended the novel, even myself, still having questions. And because, a lot of it we're still living in. The 1990s wasn't that long away. We still have political tribalism. We still have this nexus between guns and drugs and politics. And I'm not sure when it will end or so on. So it's sort of still it's still going on. I said somewhere on another panel here that one of my questions is, why do we keep having to ask the same questions? And I think that's kind of what I learned, that I'm gonna still have to keep asking it. Yeah.
But it's not something we just learn from fiction generally, that, human nature remains kind of shockingly constant over decades and
Pretty
centuries.
much.
And, yeah.
Margaret Atwood said human nature hasn't changed in 2,000 years, and she's right.
We've got like 3 minutes, so if there's a really penetrating, wonderful question from the audience that can be expressed very
Question,
succinctly,
not comment.
this would be the chance for someone to ask it. And I'm looking for a hand. Any hands? Yeah, right here in the front row.
So this question will be formulated a few different ways for each author. Miss Attenberg, was there a particular character that you were writing that threatened to sort of take over the book, or that you felt particularly in love with, or amazing?
That was amazing.
Mr. Mann, writing this book that's populated by all these sort of larger-than-life actual real people, did one of them sort of almost take over, or sort of in your mind merits their own book? And Mr. James, was there one character's voice that you really, really, really liked to write in over the others? So yeah, that's...
Yeah.
I mean, Sister T, who I read about, is like my other beloved character in the book, and I could have written about her forever, and I would have gone and hung out with her and her. I mean, a little bit you see her home, but I would have hung out with her and the nuns forever. Jews and Catholics, we have a little fascination with each other. We have because there's this Venn diagram intersection of guilt between us, but our guilt is food, and theirs is sex, and we're whoa, how can you not do that? So we're look at each other, and so we're kind of fascinated. So I mean I don't know if I have a nun novel in me, but I am interested in it. Yeah.
For me, it was Scotty, the daughter of Scott and Zelda, and she's living on her own from the age 12 on. She has a terrible relationship with Zelda. I mean, they never quite bonded there. And she looks to Scott for almost everything, but realizes that he's a drunk and not reliable. So she has to find her way in the world. And I think if I were to write a novel about anybody else in the book, it would be Scotty, because she's a fascinating life.
Think of character, it probably would have been this character Weeper, who I actually hadn't intended to give a voice to. And when it got to the point where, I need to figure this out, I didn't figure it out until I went back and read Margaret Duras' The North China Lover. And the thing I like about that novel is that it reads exactly like what it is. It actually is notes for a screenplay. And it's stage direction with some dialogue. And I really fell in love with writing him that way, where he's kind of stage directing. One of my absolute favorite scenes to write in that book actually is when he's having sex with this guy. And in between trying to have great sex, he's also imagining a flight of Jamaicans passing by the window saying, "There's that homosexual in there having gay sex." And he was a lot of fun to write, and then he died. But yeah, he's
a
somebody.
lot of people die in your book, Marlon.
I know, it's a little more than 7 killings, but he's somebody I wanted to. But funny enough, I just really liked writing in that style, and I think more that kind of detached, stage-directed prose than necessarily the character. Yeah.
Okay, so the next event is going to start in this room in about 10 minutes, and we're going to wrap up. Sure there's time to get you all out and the next set of people in. I have a couple of things to tell you. Don't start shuffling your papers yet. My closing statement. It's very helpfully provided by the book festival. It's so useful. I don't have to remember anything. Thank you for coming. And a reminder that the author's books are available from Greenlight bookstore downstairs. They'll be at signing table A. If you don't own the books already, you should all go and queue and buy them and get the book signed right now. The last thing I have to tell you is, as a special kind of 10th birthday thing, the Brooklyn Book Festival is hosting a ping pong tournament this evening. Do you know about this? Have you heard about this? So there's a Brooklyn Book Festival team and a New York Public Library team, and Marlon is playing for the Brooklyn Book Festival. So I've been asked to tell you that if you want to see the author of A Brief History of 7 Killings being completely wiped out at ping pong,
Yes.
it's at 6:30 this evening. It's in the gym on the 4th floor of St. Francis College, and it's going to be like the big raucous end of the book festival. So please feel free to go to that. And please, let's give the authors a round of applause to thank them.